Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona, it's time for Phoenix Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Hello and welcome to Phoenix Business Radio, broadcasting live from the Mac 6 Entrepreneurial Center right here in Tempe, Arizona, where we help build businesses and connect you with the right people. I'm Karen Nowicki, and I'm excited about today's conversation. Welcome back to the studio. Please, Matt Altman, CEO and co-founder of Sportiq. How are you, sir?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me back, Karen.
Woohoo, right? Exactly. We were joking in what I call the green room. It's really just a lobby for the co-work space, but I like to call it a green room. Before we went on air, Matt and our other guest, Jerry, were talking about, how many times Matt's been on with us. And I'm now reminded, we thought of a couple of shows that you've been a guest on recently, Culture Crush with Kendra Maples, People in Profit with Conscious Capitalism of Arizona. Our hosts are Jeremy and Sarah. And then I'm just now reminded when I'm looking at your guest form, Tycoons of Small Biz, too.
Correct.
That was, I think, the one we forgot to mention with Austin Peterson and Landon Mance with Backbone Financial. So thank you again for making time out for us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm really excited to be with you and Jerry today and talk business.
That's right. We're going to talk business. And Matt, I invited Matt back on as my co-host because you were kind enough to say, Karen, you really need to meet Jerry. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jeremiah Foster, president and founder of Resolute. Hello, sir.
Good afternoon. How are you?
And we're going to go with Jerry, right?
Yes, please.
Friends and family and clients call you Jerry.
My mother and my wife mostly, or if I'm in trouble, but everybody else calls me Jerry.
Do you have a middle name?
John.
Yeah. Does it ever, when you were growing up, Jeremiah John?
All the time.
Oh, yeah. Karen Isla was mine. I knew I was in trouble.
Yep.
When Dad said Karen Isla.
Yep. My mom loves to just scream it, and my wife gives it to me when I'm needing a little focus.
Right. Well, Matt, why would you say, Karen, you've got to meet Jerry and can you get him on a show kind of a thing without even me before saying, okay, if I do that, then I want you to come back to and have this conversation with us. But tell me how you know Jerry.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me was just having this conversation around business and what's been happening with people and in business in general. It's been super volatile since, COVID happened in the pandemic. And I think I thought of Jerry. Jerry and I go back now probably 8+ years. We're involved in entrepreneurs organization. So it's a peer-to-peer group to really support entrepreneurs. And I think Jerry's business acumen around helping businesses grow, but also helping businesses through tough times. And we all experienced some tough time in one shape or another and have been navigating through a lot of things. And I think Jerry has seen a lot in terms of his business around distressed businesses, how to support those businesses, get them out of it, and get to a place where you can be growing and thriving and operating in a good way. And so I think he sees a lot of things that we don't or don't want to experience. And maybe there's a lot of lessons to be learned from talking to Jerry.
Oh, I love it. What do you think? Fair enough?
High praise. Yeah. I mean, it's very nice for him to be the co-host here. It feels nice.
I love it. So Matt gave us a little bit of an idea of why he thought it was important that we share with our listeners who you are and what Resolute does. How, if we're standing in a networking group and you were, sharing your information, or you met somebody at some sort of fundraiser and you're introducing you and yourself and your profession, tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you would describe that.
Sure. So, Resolute is a company that was founded in the kind of thoughts or maybe the early stages of the last recession, I guess, if that's what it was called. So we came out of the ground in 2008 before there was essentially an issue. I mean, we were anticipating there would be a problem, and I guess all bets were right. But we essentially built our business to help business owners understand how to work through and navigate challenges. And so the common denominator of the work that we do is usually distress or crisis management. And then fundamentally, we start to apply our skills and acumen with that baseline as kind of the nominal condition. So a variety of circumstances can lead to situations of distress, but we're crisis management at the core of what we do. And then we start to kind of apply our skills as needed, depending on the operations or situations that we're engaged in.
So you don't just walk out the door in 2008 and say, hey, I'm starting a company. You got to have some background and some wisdom around this, the ability to know that you're going to be in a position to really help business owners and businesses get beyond those crunchy points, those real critical moments. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so my background, I was an engineer out of college, right? So in a normal financial context, that doesn't lend itself towards the idea of being able to be a financial firefighter. But I've built a wonderful team of individuals that are financial operations professionals. My acumen and baseline as a career let me step back. So I have a education in engineering, but fundamentally, I never actually practiced as an engineer. I got a chance to join a startup right out of school in North Scottsdale in the early 90s that was connected to technology development, and ultimately grew with inside that company and got an MBA on the job, if you will. From there, I launched another venture, and then ultimately my position in commercial real estate gave me what was the vantage point in 2007 to make the leap to create Resolute to respond to what we correctly anticipated to be a deteriorating financial market condition. And so we were right place, right time. And ultimately, my skill set as an engineer, to kind of circle back, is what fundamentally I think helps me in what I do, because the baseline of an engineer's training is how to identify and solve problems with limited inputs. So I utilize the benefit of the team that I have in terms of the work that they do, and then I layer on my ability to potentially identify how do we create a path forward and how do we understand the inputs that we have to diagnose the root of the problem.
Impressive. Matt, I want to go back to you as well so that you can introduce Sportiq and all the great things that you guys are up to as well. And then let's have that conversation around some of those challenges that you alluded to that businesses may have, and when crisis management, if that's the term I can use, makes sense. But also, as Matt kind of was sharing with us when we were in the green room, like really let's help people see what are some of the things that you can do to circumvent or prepare for ahead of time, right? So we'll just have a well-rounded conversation. But Matt, introduce us to Sportiq.
Sure. Thank you. So yeah, Sportiq is a lifestyle apparel company. We started it in 2006, and we really specialize in bringing better lifestyle apparel to what I call the destination retail space. So we work with professional sports. We're licensed with the NBA and work with the NHL teams. We do a lot in corporate retail, music, entertainment, hospitality, resorts, and tourism. So when COVID happened, we were really in the midst of moving into a mini peak season, if you will, in terms of summer tourist business and whatnot and ramping up, and all of that just stopped. And so actually, Jerry was one of the first calls I made. Here's what's happening. What are some things should I even start looking at? And obviously the first thing was just, okay, look at your lifeblood, look at cash. What does your cash flow look like? And really put a 90-day plan together around cash flow. What does it look like around knowing what I knew at that moment? But I also did some modeling that if we had no revenue coming in, how long can we last? And it really tested and stressed on how we look at things. And then from there, Jerry was really helpful. He had a blueprint of, okay, well, look at this, and start looking at some of these tactics to really make sure that your house can be in order to move forward through this.
So firsthand experience with Jerry as your co-pilot to make your way through this kind of unprecedented and uncertain time, right? To use some of the words that we've been throwing around a lot over the past year and a half, almost 2 years. And one of the things that you shared with me when we greeted each other today was that things are great. Like you're growing.
Yeah, we're actually having the best growth that we've ever had as a company right now, and it's really phenomenal to see, and it creates all kinds of new challenges. But I'd much rather face these growth challenges than sorry, Jerry, but the distress challenges. But I think that's the whole point, right? Is working with someone like Jerry can help you see blind spots in your business that you might not be able to see that could be potential problems or hiccups down the line. Cure those things so you can really grow and flourish.
Yeah, I mean, look, thank you again, Matt. That's really nice. It's and when the COVID wave hit, I guess the initial thought I had about our business is that we were going to be incredibly busy. The reality is there's not been a tremendous amount of distress in corporate America. I mean, I know that sounds like a crazy paradigm, but at the end of the day, when the federal government was firing the cash bazooka, essentially there's a lot of companies that were ultimately rescued by that. And so I have to give credit where credit is due. That really great policy that was created at a federal level and their quick action to put money in the hands of business owners, not in the hands of banks like was done through TARP, but put money in the hands of business owners really prevented what otherwise would have been a catastrophic meltdown in the economy. For companies like Matt and others that are in hospitality, aviation, who knows where it would have gone. We have done just fine, but it ultimately has not been the cataclysmic event that we thought it would be. And so it goes against conventional wisdom when you tell people what I do and they're like, oh, you must be crazy busy. And, for the most part, we've stayed engaged, but it has not been what everybody would have otherwise thought in terms of, people's businesses literally falling left and right, thankfully, because of the efforts of those that were able to kind of create this monetary policy. The stimulus worked. I think, the challenge ahead is really a function of there is very likely scenarios where, and in most of the banks that I talk to, and we do a variety of, our check-in points are with people that are in the legal community and in the banking community. And when you do the check-ins with those individuals, they are well-versed and understand that they have companies on their rosters or portfolios that absolutely have challenges related to their business. But the current circumstances typically follow a similar pattern, which is they received so much stimulus that they have a tremendous amount of liquidity, and that when that liquidity ultimately dries up, they'll be left to try to reconcile what do they do next. And so, perhaps there's a takeaway from our conversation today about some ways under which that if they can actually see that today they have a lifeline or they have a scenario under which the business can exist, and maybe there's a period of time that they could retool or reorient the kind of new path forward. Maybe they get the benefit of that today. But, if in fact they wait too long and then all those monies burn off, then they're left with kind of a bad business model in a not good market. They could be someone that perhaps falls into a circumstance that our services might be required.
Yeah, I mean, if I can speak to that, I think the biggest thing is adapting to what is happening, and you have to change. You have to pivot. You have to look at your business differently. You have to make different decisions. And I think I'll just speak from what the conversations I've had with lenders. If they're looking at businesses and they're just waiting for things to just go back to normal, it's not going. That's really a recipe for disaster. You really need to pull back the curtain and look at every aspect of how you're looking to operate your business, from your customers to your employees to your supply chain partners, your business model in general, and really see what's working and how to make it better and what needs to change and try something different. And I think, fortunately for me, that was one of the things that we did very early on, was pivot and made changes, but also stay true to our core values. We stayed true to our core business, because that core business was good and was good pre-COVID. And it was really about how best to navigate those things. So as we moved into where people were congregating, people were going to events, and people were somewhat traveling again, that the clients that we work with were picking up market share as well. And then a lot of things shifted online. So our online business, I think we've talked about this before, really spiked last year. It's leveled off now, but our clients that we're having success with, they all have great e-com pieces to their business.
Have they had that ready anyway? Because that would be another consideration, right? Like when we talk about pivoting and shifting, especially when it is taking mainly brick and mortar or in-person businesses online, there's a lot of things that have to be put in place. So with the folks that you work with, the vendors and the clientele that you work with, were many of them ready to just ramp up that aspect?
Okay, so the ones that we were successful with during COVID, yes. And then there was a lot, no, and they're ramping up now.
Yeah.
What an interesting paradigm, though. I guess the silver lining of COVID, perhaps with the reflection of many companies, Matt might be a great example, is when in the opportunity for developing a company do you get a chance, I don't want to say for a do-over, but the ability to kind of really investigate and kind of review your business to understand how you can take it forward. Too often we experience environments where people, the pace of business is moving so fast that number one, they can't plot the future. And number two, they never get a deep breath to understand the strategy. And COVID, in a weird way, gave people a chance, like Matt, to kind of reevaluate the business, double down on places that they think will likely carry them forward, and respond to what was a black swan event that nobody had anticipated. And probably on the backside, you're coming out stronger.
Yeah.
And so I think if the approach and perhaps the mindset associated with how people appreciate COVID is that it gave, with the benefit of using the time wisely, I recognize many people like to focus on the negative. And clearly, if we see it all the time. I mean, if you're faced with this really overwhelming scenario under which the business that you've built and that you're vested in and everything essentially just goes away and you have no control over it, that feels like an insurmountable task. But perhaps your ability to kind of look at that from another perspective and say, I mean, great, Matt's a wonderful example of this. I mean, his industry, his business is built on people and people being in places. And when that ultimately changed for reasons everything outside of his control, there were dark days early, I should suspect, because he was going into this, knowing him personally, he was really excited about where the future was. So he's making big bets.
Saw it.
Well, he was making big bets on how do you take it forward. And then all of a sudden, everything changed. Thankfully, the world came back together quickly. But I think Matt's a great credit to the opportunity that was provided in terms of being able to take inventory of where you are, understand the assets and strategies that work, and how do you double down on things that lead you forward.
I want to highlight, too, the relationship, right? You mentioned that you guys are in a peer group. I think I also read somewhere on either one of your bios around, well, you had mentioned also the startup community as well, but you've been a voice in the startup community as well, have you not?
Yeah, so we're both involved in Entrepreneurs Organization. We've served on the board together. I've been involved with Seed Spot and been a mentor there. Obviously involved with Conscious Capitalism nationally and locally.
And the reason why I ask about that aspect of running business is that when crisis or difficult times show up for folks, and as you pointed out, their heads are in the mode of, we were headed this way, but oh my gosh, now this has happened, right? How important is it to have a Jerry in your pocket? Or how important are those relationships? Because you had even mentioned it, Matt. You said, and you alluded to it just a moment ago. You were headed in a certain direction. You saw success. You had planned and prepared for that, building towards that. And then who would have expected that we're no longer going to sports events and hospitality? People aren't traveling to certain places. You mentioned early on when you introduced Jerry that you knew you had someone that you could go to and go, holy cow, what do we do, right? So let's talk about how important relationships are before the crap hits the fan.
Yeah, so I'll go first, I guess, if you're good with that. I'd like to give a plug for Entrepreneurs Organization. It's a peer-to-peer organization, and there's many benefits that come from it, but the community associated with how we got to know each other and then the larger community really functions as a fantastic security blanket in moments like these where my skill set perfectly aligned with that scenario. And other circumstances, Matt brings things to the table for me that I would not otherwise have the benefit of. Mm-hmm. So, when COVID hit in the weird way, and as I've explained, the market ultimately, or the circumstance and conditions for my business, while not obvious, really didn't turn on. What I was most concerned about in the early days of COVID is triaging friends. And so pro bono, I was reaching out to people that I knew and I cared about, like Matt, that had circumstances and businesses that I knew were directly affected, whether it was Matt in the lifestyle apparel business or others that are in the concert promotion business or what have you, to try to just offer my services for free and say, hey, I know you're not asking, but by the way, I know what this looks like and it's really dark skies. And let me just give you a couple, here's kind of a couple tricks. And that felt good. It felt really good because not often do I get a chance to work with people that I know, and the ability to put my skills to work with individuals that I know and care about and be able to try to lead them forward is really gratifying. A lot of times it's funny. My wife, when we go to cocktail parties, is like, don't tell people what you do. Because she's like, I mean, in a nice way. I mean, she's not embarrassed by it, but a lot of people, like, in a weird way, people think of me as like a corporate undertaker, or scenarios under which, we live in circumstances that many people don't like to admit or acknowledge. We are, to a certain degree, the boogeyman. And so, but I appreciate that. I understand that every business has a life cycle and we perform a certain role there. And so we approach all those scenarios with grace and with respect. And those individuals are, in that time of their existence, are going through difficult times. And we try to approach them from a humanity perspective and say, hey, how can we help you get through this next scenario? Whether it's to give you the business back in a healthier form, or perhaps help you understand the next stage and what that looks like.
So when we were in the green room, Jerry, great analogy around his business. Like, look, no one wants to go to the ER room and have to deal with a traumatic situation. Same in business. And I think Jerry gave a great analogy, if you want to share, on terms of how triage. You guys come in and triage and help a business.
Yeah. So there are very, very wonderful, great, and successful consultants in this world that take you from point A, and the trajectory is higher. Many people run away from chaos, run away from crisis, run away from distress. It's messy, it's emotional, it's challenging. We thrive. That's where we live. And so the anecdotal analogy is that we're trauma surgeons. The circumstances get thrust upon you in that kind of visual context. You're on a gurney, you had a gunshot wound, you get wheeled into the hospital. They don't know you're coming. We don't know much about your business, but there's a very small window that we can be helpful to try to keep you alive. And so we're not the general practitioner who says, yeah, you should lose 10 pounds and you should probably eat better and you should probably do those kinds of things if you want to live a longer life. It's kind of like the next quarter, 2 quarters, year is really critical for the survival of your business. And what can we do to help you get through that?
Worth re-mentioning for our listeners, for sure.
And I want to kind of go back to the EO comment. So EO there's a local chapter, but it's also global. And I think what was super helpful for me during the initial stages of COVID is no one was meeting in person, but EO really stepped in on a global level, was able to get a lot of speakers, a lot of learning events to connect with people globally, to just communicate and learn and how to navigate some things that are happening. And one thing that was really helpful for me was I had done an exec ed program at Harvard Business School through EO, and that whole cohort got together. We got our professor that we had, Professor Applegate, who we had through that whole week. She spent an hour and a half with us walking through all kinds of things and what to look for, how to deal with things of that nature. And it was a world of a benefit that, I would have never dreamed I could have had, that really helped validate some of the things I was doing and also give some new ideas on how to just continue to navigate.
Mindset is everything. Correct. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. Like, I've had, of course, the occasion to talk to Matt a handful of times, and first was introduced to you through Conscious Capitalism because you were right here at Mac 6 doing a presentation. Brian Moore was interviewing you. And at the time, Deb Karen had just been launching her show, Culture Crush, which now is Kendra Maple's show. But Deborah looked at me and she points, and whispers to me, pointing at Matt, he's my first guest, right? But I think part of what you were talking about as you built up Sportiq was this idea around having that champion mindset and that, instead of the fixed mindset, of course, growth mindset. How important is that when you're working with business owners in these moments that they're willing to run alongside and say, let's do this, right? You guys, you live in this space. How important is it that the people that you're working with can show up there as well? Do you have to do some mind bending with them, or do you find that they're typically like Matt, like, okay, hunkering down, let's do this?
Yeah. So I think someone brought up the viewpoint earlier that, when the world gets dark for that particular business owner, the blinders get very narrow, and ultimately in the circumstances under which I'm involved, depending on how far along it is, when your typical relationship goes from you interacting with your banker to you interacting with your banker's lawyer, People in normal worlds don't like to have lawyers in their life. I mean, I know it's probably lawyers and dentists have a society of, woe is me in the world, but, and I happen to love and have many people in my life that are wonderful attorneys. So I'd say that in jest, but, that's the normal course of pattern in terms of when things go wrong. You hear from an attorney and then they become fixated on, well, why is this happening and how did this take place? But the banker didn't hear my story and all that kind of stuff. And so, one of the fundamental values of our company is that trust is our currency. And so that applies in many ways. Most importantly, it applies with the business owner that essentially puts their trust in us, and we have to earn it from them, but we have to give them to kind of allow us to do our job. And our job is, you need to go back to running your business, and we can handle this interaction with the bank or the attorney because we know what they're looking for. We know the language they speak. They're not challenging you on your integrity. They're not suggesting that you're running a terrible business. Something happened along the way. We need to educate them about what's wrong, what's our path to get it fixed, and how do we get there.
How does Resolute, do you go in court and help? I mean, I'm assuming there are some court issues that come up.
Yeah. So it all depends. We've had wonderful arrangements that, let me say it differently. Our best scenario is to get involved with business owners that early in the process recognize that things are not trending their way. Mm-hmm. A great example is a scenario under which I had spoken with a business owner last week, and he runs a $50 million subcontractor for construction. In all contexts, in this environment, everybody would think the guy's making money hand over fist. The reality was he was breaking even. And so he's running a company with 750 people. He's got a lot of top line revenue, and he's literally struggling to go to work every day because he's like, this is too hard to not make any money. And so in that circumstance, he was kind of bold enough to embrace the idea that he needed help. So we got involved, and we are likely to get involved. But the position in speaking with him is, the issues are bigger than me. I need someone else to come in alongside of me. I knew what I was doing when I was kind of a smaller operator. Now the business has really grown. I need you to help me kind of, number one, diagnose the issues. How do we get to the problem? And perhaps it's operational, perhaps it's financial. Maybe it's a combination of both. And then I need you to help me then build back my team such that you can, because I always say we have commitment issues. We're not long-term players, right? A lot of times people are like, don't leave. You've got it all figured out. We can't see you step out the door. And that's not how we're built. We're there to kind of get involved, fix it, move on. And, the trauma surgeon analogy is the great example. We'd like to get you back in the care of your primary care provider. We're not a good fit in that world. And there's a lot of great people out there that do that kind of thing.
But you know your lane.
We know our lane. We're very niched, and we understand how we work and the services we perform. And some people say we're crazy because the stress level of what we do is way higher. But it's also what motivates us and kind of puts the gas in the engine, right? That's the nitrous.
It's your zone of genius.
Yeah. So, but in to go back in terms of, I'm sorry, your question was.
Well, I was just curious. I was thinking about legal situations, yes. And do you support businesses when there's attorney? You mentioned, of course, attorneys involved, but do you help them through court situations, or tell us about that?
So in the context of distress, there's a variety of circumstances that can evolve, and some of them are initiated by the company, and others are initiated by the banks. Mm-hmm. Bankruptcy, in the context of how it's utilized, is actually initiated by the company. And there's obviously two different types of bankruptcy. There's Chapter 11 and Chapter 7 for the benefit of companies, both of which are initiated from a company perspective. I mean, there can be circumstances under which involuntary bankruptcies, and for the attorneys listening, they'll be like, well, technically this or that. But for the most part, it's usually an individual or a company coming forward saying, I need the help of the courts to get time to restructure my debts. Or that's the case of a Chapter 11 or a Chapter 7 where they say, I can't, the business can't go on any further, and I'm just going to give it away to a third party to wind it down. In a receivership, which is another context, that's really a lender-based action where they basically vote for no confidence in the leadership, and they say the company you're running, that is my money is lent to that company. I don't feel like you're a good steward in that environment, whether it's over assets or some type of operating business. And we want to elect to make a change of control. And so, all of those things that I just described are court-based environments, and we've performed all of those roles. But going back to the example that I used about the construction company, none of that involves court. So
but you will do both.
Yeah, we can get there, and so if you look at it from a degree of severity, lenders got really smart out of the last recession, and I think their preference would be to keep everybody out of court, because when you get to court, costs go up. There's a lot of process and procedure that start and get involved, and essentially it becomes something that can't be slowed down. And so there's costs on behalf of the company, and perhaps their terminal costs, meaning the cost gets so great that it potentially takes every bit of the capital that's available and essentially gets put into the places of administrative costs or whatever you. So I think if you were to ask most lenders, they would say, we would welcome a chance to work with a company that understands its faults, appreciates the path forward, and is willing to try to give it a great effort to move in that direction. That is the best course of action to bring forward in a distressed situation. Too often, people in a closely held or private corporation scenario, nobody likes bad news. And so therefore, they don't like to talk about bad news. They don't like to admit that they have a problem. And so therefore, that timeline goes too far down, and they lose those options the longer it goes. And so, again, we have way more tools in our toolbox earlier in the process. We don't have as many tools if it goes longer.
How do you avoid those points of no return?
I guess if you can see that essentially the business is making a lot of revenue but not making a lot of profit, right? That may not trend negatively in the beginning, but ultimately, if you can't figure it out quickly, it gets to be there in a real hurry. If you have disagreements between partners, look, when the parents are fighting, the kids know, and so ultimately in an environment where you have leadership challenges and you've got two or multiple partners that essentially are not getting along, and there's a whole bunch of squabbling or that could turn into litigation, that doesn't motivate your team. And especially in today's recruiting environment and in their labor environment, individuals don't stick around for stuff like that. And so we see a lot of that too. If you have external litigation, like you've got someone that's essentially making an allegation against you as a company, those are also distractions for capital, because now you got to pay an attorney to represent you on your side to tell your story, and those are expensive propositions. So there's a large variety of things that could come into play that are kind of telltale signs. I will say, and it's not meant to be kind of silly, but there's many times every situation presents differently, but sometimes they all lead to the same result.
He's right on so many levels. I think for me, again, I go back to prevention, and I go back to proper business fundamentals, and I'll go back to the COVID situation. You talked about, leadership, and things of that nature. You've heard me talk about this in the past, so I'll bring it up again. It's values, and really having a team that's rooted and committed to working and operating amongst those values. So when things happen, can you honestly and truly look at your values and ask, how am I going to respond to what's happening with our values, through our values? So, one of ours is evolve, and that is really to have a learning and growth mindset. So when distress or challenges are happening, how can we look at that and really own it? And for us, it's really about how to really get better 1% personally and professionally, every day. So that's the opportunity. I think every day there's an opportunity in your life to learn, grow in whatever it is, in your business, in your own life, things of that nature. But if you just in the construct of a business, there's always opportunity. There's always going to be challenges, and there's always going to be opportunity. And so how do you continue to have that growth mindset, find those opportunities, but you still have to solve for what's happening, whatever the bottleneck is, whatever the constraint is that's preventing you from moving in the right direction. A long time ago, someone told me that if something isn't going wrong in your business, then something's wrong. So, that doesn't mean it's traumatic. It just means there's something that needs to be addressed on some level. And so, 12 months ago, it was sales and inventory. And now it's, operations and fulfilling orders and dealing with supply chain things, that are out of our control, whether, with freight forwarders and logistics and what's happening in the world. But yeah, there's always going to be something.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, and look, that's the beauty of business, right? For people that are really excited about being involved in business, that's the cerebral exercise to kind of constantly solve for the issue, right? And so if everything was easy, boy, everybody would do it, right? But I mean, if we were just there to kind of do the kind of Charlie Chaplin thing on the production line, nobody would be stimulated to take the risk to do business. So I can fully appreciate that in the context of Matt now growing a company. And it's equally important in the world that I live in, which is trying to solve when things are not perhaps trending in the right direction. But universally, I would agree with the statement, which is, there's always something that could be a focus, and there's always an opportunity to improve. And that's how ultimately you strive to get better.
As much as we love the calm water and the opportunity to sit back and take a breath and go, oh, wow, we're doing great. We need to also be growing and reaching for those opportunities to say, hey, it's a little crunchy right now. We need to get scrappy, and we need to figure out how to continue to evolve and thrive. I think many of us who are business owners are driven that way anyway.
But there are events that happen in the course of a business that maybe even in the most stable businesses, right? You have an individual who retires, or an individual who takes a step out of the workforce to raise a family, or an individual so you may have HR issues, or you may have some interruption in your supply chain, or you may have something like that. So as smooth as you always want it, there's always going to be likely an issue. And it's how you respond to it. Which is your point,
right, Matt? Like, if it's, how did you word it again? The phrasing was, if there's no problem in your business, you have a problem.
Yeah. I mean, if there isn't something there's always going to be something going on in your business. And if there isn't, then there's something wrong. Yeah. Like if everything is just okay, then there's something wrong then, because that's just not reality.
Right. Yeah. It's not reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like growing up in the families that, you think you're always happy. The reality is there's no such thing. So yeah, let's
even the happiest cheerleader in high school still has a dark day, right?
Yes. I might have been that cheerleader. I just might have been that person.
Well, the thing about this pandemic, it's really been on all of us. It's leveled the playing field to some degree, because I always have said no one goes through this life unscathed. Yep. We all deal with some sort of trial, tribulation, dare I say trauma in our life, whether it's emotional, physical, mental, whatever. It's part of our evolution in being here. We go through these experiences, but the pandemic, we're going through this all together.
Yep.
It's not like this happened to me when I was 8 years old and something happened to Jerry when he was 12 and something happened to you when you were 15. It's like, no, we're all experiencing this together in real time.
Yep.
And I think it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And it really has the gift or the silver lining, right, is that we all kind of are looking through, or we've been invited to and encouraged to look through life and business through a different lens, because it was across the board globally. I know Matt's familiar, I believe anyway. In 2019, at the close of 2019, I went through just personal hell. My then husband was in trauma intensive care unit. We talk about trauma and triage for a month, and post-acute facility for a month after that. And Kendra Maples and the folks here at Mac 6 ran the business for me for 4 months when I was trying to figure out how do we keep them alive. There were a lot of financial things and business things that I was unaware of that came to light. And then COVID hit. And I say this tongue-in-cheek, I say this jokingly, but my life had been shattered in a way that I never thought it would be. And then the world experienced chaos. And part of me was like, oh, thank God, right? And I say that jokingly because I would never want to wish on anybody. But then people could understand what it's like to have to really get clear about what are your values, how are you going to thrive, how do you work through this, right? And that's part of what I imagine you patting these business owners on the back like, we got you.
Yeah.
Here's how you have to show up in this, and you can show up like this, and let us handle these things. You go back to work and do these things. But I had to do that very personally and with my kids and our extended family. And then we all were doing it collectively. To Matt's point, life is about challenges. Life is about setting a trajectory for yourself and saying, how am I going to show up in this? And knowing that we can do it. And when we can't, bringing in people to help us find that way.
Yeah. If I could steal a quote, and Monty Williams is the coach of the Suns, and I don't know
great one. I know where you're going.
He
I loved it.
In the finals, I thought, and I think he got mic'd, and it came out later, but he said, everything you want is on the other side of hard.
For sure.
And I thought it was such an amazing quote, and it really typifies kind of a lesson learned for almost many people in COVID, right? And it's just such a universally applied scenario, and you can take it so far. But what a neat guy to have that forethought, and perhaps it may not even be his quote, but I loved when he said it because he was trying to motivate his team, and he just said, "Hey guys, skies are dark, but we're going to get there, and everything you want is on the other side of hard." And I just thought it was so amazingly poignant,
and so different than the other saying that is everything's on the other side of the comfort zone. To me, which I've heard that phrase several times, that's a little softer version of what we're saying here. Hard is part of life, to Matt's point. And if you can get through hard and you can find the resolve to work through that, you're golden.
So let me take us down to maybe a different path here. Is the one constant in our life is change.
Yep.
We can't escape it. Change is part of, this journey. And it's sometimes, when we see the reason for change, that it's for the better, we have no problem with it. But if we can't see and understand, we fight change. And when I say we, us as humans, but this is the question that I've been, asking. So I'm glad it's coming up, right now, is understanding that change is a constant. If you were to, for the listeners, you can do this at wherever you're listening, and you guys can do this on your own. But on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, you love change, you embrace change. I'm totally fine with it. And 1 is, I hate it. I don't want ever to deal with it. Like, where do you land on that scale of 1 to 10, right? So do that in your own mind. And then the same question, but around growth. How do you feel about growth on that scale of 1 to 10? 10 being, I love growth. I want to grow. I'm excited about growing, like whether it's, personally or professionally. And 1 is, no, I don't want to grow. I'm totally happy, the way I am. And most people will have growth on the higher part of the scale because they want that. But what is growth? It's change. You can't grow without change.
I was going to say those two things are in tension with each other, because there's too often many times where people aspirationally
you can't
say
grow without tension,
but
and you can't grow without tension.
Yeah,
but that's a beautiful way to evaluate the synergy or lack of synergy between those two commitments. And if you're really down here on both, I think you're in trouble.
So well, it's the law of unintended consequences, right? Like it's the opportunity to say, I really want to grow. And then they're like, whoa, hold on a second. So I got to jump off this cliff? Like, oh, that wasn't in my...
I was just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so the wings really are going to pop out and I'm going to fly? Yeah. Or like, that's a really risky move. And we know some people in our life that are cliff jumpers, right? Like they're just willing to do it. And then, but I think the large majority stand at the edge and they're like, whoa.
I'm a calculated
cliff jumper. Right. And that's right. Humanity. We should be asking those questions, but business owners and entrepreneurs, especially those in startups, those are critical questions.
But can I add something to that, which I think is really critical to our larger conversation is, there's a way to take people that ultimately are high on the growth scale and low on the change scale. And the common denominator is leadership. And if you can be a good leader to help people understand how to get from A to B, and if that ability for those individuals is to grow, they need to know that somebody's kind of there leading the way. And that works in a growth mindset. It works in a distress mindset. And it's about getting them to buy into a process. But it comes down to organically, many people may not be positioned to be that person. Again, when they get to that issue and they learn the tension involved with growth and change, they maybe stop. But if there's, and there's coaching, there's all these different things that exist in our world today to kind of help people kind of move on from those mindsets. But in an organization in particular, in the environment that I see these things presented in, let me just paint the picture for you. We walk in and I fired the guy that used to run this company is no longer there. And I'm the new boss. I mean, how well do you think that goes often, right? Hey, guess what? I know that you came to work for somebody else, but he probably he didn't lead the company in the right direction. And now all of a sudden you're reporting to me. And that's a really, really dramatic circumstance for many people to kind of digest. And as I mentioned, we're building trust. We're trying to earn some currency there in terms of trying to get them. And so that's where the leadership qualities kind of show up.
And it has to be.
It's quick.
Fast because it's triage.
Yeah, it's quick.
So you don't trust me right now, but give me the opportunity to prove myself.
Yeah.
And but I need you to do
what
XYZ.
I tell my team, meaning the Resolute team, is look, everything we do has to be backed up with action. And everything we say has to be done. Because that's how you build the trust, right? Yeah. It's like in the past, in these distressed environments, too often there were stories told that never came to life, right? Oh, we'll get it solved next week. Oh, this will come together. It'll be different next time. And that story gets told over and over and over again. And, not to use the analogy of the family, but the kids learn what the parents are telling them and if it works or doesn't work. So in our world, when we're coming in and trying to do something different, we have to actually stand behind everything we do. And we have to over communicate why we're doing the things that we are. And get people's buy-in. And fundamentally, there's a lot of great people out there that just want to do their job. And that's what we go back to telling them is yesterday you were this business, today you're this same business, it's just a different person. And we need you more than ever.
Mm-hmm. Can you believe we're almost at the top of the hour? It goes quick.
We just got warmed up.
I know, right? We could keep doing this. I hope you'll both come back to do it with us again. Is there any thing that I hadn't thought to ask or anything that you kind of had wanted to make sure our listeners were aware of around all the topics we've talked about before we close out today?
I'm thrilled to be here. I just want to say thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you, Matt, for being the co-host today. I'm honored to be in your presence as such a prolific presenter or participant in these shows.
Just take a nice deep breath and accept the compliment. I know you're very humble, but that's obviously sincere. And shout out to Cece on your team.
She's wonderful, by the way.
Cece, if you're listening, we want to thank you for making sure that we all got to land here today.
I give many, many great credits to Cece for
haven't met her
wonderful
in
things.
person yet, but I sense that she's a great teammate. Yes. Maybe could lead us to just the last little segment here around culture, because Matt, I know I've heard you speak to culture so many times when you've been in this room on air with us, and certainly when you've been speaking. And Sportiq, right? It's all about culture. We're both, again, members of the Conscious Capital of Arizona, and how important it is to have all stakeholders' involvement. You just spoke to that as well, right? When you come in and you're saving a business and you're asking the employees and the vendors and, of course, the customers and clients to stay on board with us. We're going to get through this. Let's talk about culture for just a few moments. Could you highlight a little bit about how important that's been for you as you've nurtured and grown Sportiq?
Yeah, I can't say enough about it. I think it's everything. It's really what drives the values, the behaviors, the decisions of the entire organization. So it's not just my decisions. It's other decisions or other work that people are doing or other interactions that they're having with clients or internally. And I said this just the other day because we've had some challenges with some people within our production facility. And I, firmly said building our culture is just as important as building the product and the service that we're providing. They have to be the quality of the culture has to be as good as the product that we're, producing. But that comes down to people. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to each individual person coming together collectively. So there has to be some sort of guidance or North Star, so to speak. And again, that's where I think values really come into play. And then it really comes into play to hiring people that are aligned to that environment and the culture that you're trying to build. Jack Daly, he's a great keynote speaker. He speaks primarily on sales, but he did an event with EO years ago, probably easily 7 years ago, but it was around culture. And he's very stern. He's a dynamic speaker, and he just looked everyone in the eye and he said, "Look, as presidents, as owners, as entrepreneurs of your business, your main job is to get the culture right. You get the culture right, everything, will fall into place. And I think more so than ever, as there's been transitions in the labor market, we're bringing on new people. It's really how to guide and continue to evolve the culture. So yeah.
Anything to add to that, Jerry?
Yeah, so I have 2 data points to offer. I have the data point that we present when we go into a distressed business, and the scenario there, and there's a gentleman who seems to have emerged on a kind of national stage. Marcus Lemonis does this thing called The Prophet on CNBC, and it's very analogous to the work that we do. And he likes to kind of evangelize the idea that it starts with people, then you get process, then you get profit. It's very much the case when we get involved. I mean, to a large degree, the people that are with the exception of the executive team, when we get involved in these distressed businesses, the normal largest body of the staff are kind of pawns in the game, right? They're individuals that go to work, they want to do their job. They understand maybe things are wrong or something's not going well. We want to win the hearts and minds of those people as quickly as we can. Again, building that trust, earning their trust, and doing the things we say we can do. And they're 50% or more of the plan to get back in the right direction. Because if you can't get people to buy in, and if they don't believe in what you're doing, then you've lost. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, I have my team at Resolute, and my team at Resolute are, we talked about kind of what those environments look like for those people, and it's really high stressful environments. So the culture we try to create in our environment is really light and airy and fun, and it's kind of like a firehouse, if you will, right? It's meant to be a safe place that you can come back to and you can enjoy, and so it's not techie with beanbags, but it's meant to kind of be a warm, safe blanket that it's not stressful. It's not meant to kind of push and amp up the, it's meant to say, welcome home. When you're here, we want to take care of you.
Take a breath.
Yeah, you've been out doing all these wonderful things for other companies. When you come back to our home, it's meant to feel comfortable. It's meant to, and so we try to do a lot of team building things. We really, at Resolute, with the help of my team, we try to invest a lot in culture, because the work that we ask our people to do is inherently stressful because we take other people's problems on.
That's a great...
That was big there.
I wouldn't even have thought how critical that is. But again, around culture, it's critical that be part of how you take care of your people.
Or else burnout is, It's not uncommon for people to be like, I can't do this. You know what I mean? Yep. I can't be this person for my family and this person in my professional life. And then you in my work environment create that, so we have to try to create a disconnect that gives them a safe place. And we're working hard at it. I always like to say it's a journey. It's not a destination. And so we always can improve, and we're doing our best to get better every day.
Thank you both for being here. This was a lot of fun.
Yes.
I'm glad I took Matt up on the suggestion. And thanks, Matt, for coming back.
Yeah, my pleasure.
As we get ready to close today's conversation, if each of you could share where a business owner might connect with you. Let's start with Jerry. What's the best way to say, hey, we might be a good fit? How do we find that out?
So Cece, who you plugged earlier, has been a tremendous resource, and her talents are best manifested in telling the story about Resolute at our website. And so that's at www.resolutecommercial, all one word.com. And through that lens, you'll get the benefit of seeing all the services that we offer. And if we could be of service, please let us know.
Great. Can we find you and Resolute on LinkedIn as well?
We can, yeah. I believe it's under Resolute Commercial Services.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Sportiq, Matt, where do we find you?
Well, first of all, if you want to be comfortable, as Jerry mentioned, in his workplace, Sportiq.com.
Yeah.
Know you after the Q. Yeah, so you can follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn as well, or connect or ask a question, anything of that nature.
Yeah, and then the group, the EO group that you're involved in, where would people learn more? Not necessarily about yours.
Entrepreneurs Organization, entrepreneursorganization.com.
I think it's eo.org.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
so
thanks,
fun.
Karen. Love what you're doing and giving business leaders, owners, whatnot, a voice and a means to connect and get some insights into how to get better.
Yeah, that's what we do.
A gracious host and a fun conversation. So thank you for including me.
My pleasure. You've been listening to Phoenix Business Radio. Broadcasting live from Max 6 Entrepreneur Center right here in Tempe, Arizona. Some media leans left, some lean right, and we lean business. Until next time, I'm Karen Nowicki. Thanks for listening.